The last resort. The crystalline spires of the Meridian Alliance's central chamber caught the light of 3 setting suns, casting prismatic shadows across the emergency session of the Grand Council. Ambassador Tilara watched the ancient chamber fill with representatives from 100 worlds, their faces drawn with exhaustion and fear. The chamber, designed to house 3,000 delegates, now held barely 300. Empty seats told the story of worlds already lost. The swarm has breached the outer rim defenses, Fleet Admiral Ixel announced, his holographic form flickering above the central podium. The veteran commander's usually immaculate scales had lost their luster, dulled by months of continuous combat. Colonies in the Deneth and Vega sectors have gone dark. We've lost contact with the 7th Fleet. Tilara felt the collective shudder that ran through the chamber. The 7th Fleet had been their strongest remaining battle group, comprised of the finest ships the Alliance could still field. Its loss meant their last conventional defense had crumbled. How long? The question came from Counselor Rem, his crystalline form reflecting the chamber's dim light. At current velocity, the swarm will reach the core worlds in 30 standard cycles. Admiral Ixel's voice carried the weight of certainty. They're not even pausing to consolidate their gains anymore. This is a push for complete extinction. The swarm. They'd appeared 18 months ago at the galaxy's edge, a vast armada of biological ships that consumed everything in their path. Initial diplomatic attempts had failed. The swarm didn't communicate, didn't negotiate, didn't take prisoners. They simply devoured, using captured resources to spawn more ships, more troops, more weapons. The Alliance, for all its technological advancement and military might, had proven woefully unprepared. Their energy weapons seemed to barely inconvenience the swarm's organic hulls, which regenerated almost as quickly as they could be damaged. Conventional tactics failed against an enemy that operated with perfect hive-mind coordination and showed no concern for casualties. We've exhausted every option. First Speaker Naix declared, her ethereal form dimming with distress. Our strongest weapons, our most brilliant strategies, our deepest resources, all have failed. The swarm adapts too quickly, learns too fast. Each victory we manage only makes them stronger. Tilara rose from her seat, her 4 hearts pounding. She'd waited, hoping someone else would make this suggestion, but time had run out. There is one option we haven't considered, she said, her voice carrying in the perfect acoustics of the chamber. One species we haven't approached. The humans. Counselor Rem's crystalline surface clouded with doubt. They're barely interstellar. Their technology is centuries behind ours. Most of their ships still use chemical propulsion. They're also the only spacefaring species we've never properly studied, Tilara countered. Our attempts at formal contact have been rebuffed for the past century. They maintain minimal trade through automated outposts, but refuse deeper diplomatic relations. With good reason. Admiral Ixel interjected. Our long-range observations suggest they're remarkably unstable. They still fight among themselves, maintain multiple competing governments, and their approach to technology is chaotic at best. They'll bolt cutting-edge quantum computers into ships that still use combustion engines. Exactly. Tilara projected an image into the chamber center, a human vessel, ugly and asymmetrical by Alliance standards. Look at their ships. No standardization, no elegant design philosophy. Each one is different, modified, jury-rigged with whatever they had available. They're technological scavengers, mixing ancient and modern systems in ways that shouldn't work but somehow do. First Speaker Naix drifted closer to the projection. And how does this help us against the swarm? The swarm adapts by analyzing patterns, by learning our strategies and technologies. But humans, Tilara highlighted various sections of the ship's scan. They're unpredictable. Their military doctrine, from what we've observed, isn't based on perfection or optimization. It's based on adaptation, improvisation, and what they call working with what you've got. You're suggesting we ask these primitives for military aid. Counselor Rem's tone carried equal parts disbelief and disdain. Even if they agreed, what could they possibly offer against an enemy that's defeated our finest fleets? Tilara took a deep breath. Something the swarm has never encountered. Chaos. Humans don't fight like we do. They don't seek perfect solutions or optimal strategies. They experiment. They take risks. They do things that make no logical sense, but sometimes achieve impossible results. The chamber erupted in overlapping arguments. Tilara waited them out, knowing time would force a decision. Finally, first speaker Naix raised her hands for silence. "We are out of alternatives," she declared. "Our models show total extinction within 60 cycles if nothing changes. Ambassador Tilara, you've studied human communications. Can you prepare a message they might actually respond to?" Tilara nodded. They have a curious cultural affinity for lost causes and desperate stands. If we appeal to that aspect of their psychology, they might listen. "Then do it," first speaker Naix commanded. "But be clear about the stakes. We need help immediately, not after months of diplomatic maneuvering." As the chamber emptied, Admiral Ixel approached Tilara's position. "You really think they'll help? From what I've seen, they can barely cooperate with each other, let alone an alien civilization." Tilara studied the image of the human ship still rotating above the chamber floor. "That's exactly why I think they might be our last hope. The swarm operates with perfect unity, perfect coordination. But humans, they thrive on disagreement, on competing ideas and approaches. They don't seek consensus. They argue their way to solutions we'd never consider. And if they refuse, then we die knowing we tried everything," Tilara said simply. "But something tells me they won't refuse. Not when we tell them everyone else already has." As she began composing the message that might determine the fate of 1,000 worlds, Tilara reflected on everything she'd learned about human nature. They were violent, yes, and chaotic and unpredictable. But they were also innovative, adaptable, and possessed of a strange determination that seemed to grow stronger the more desperate their situation became. The message would need to be perfect, direct enough to convey urgency but appealing to their peculiar sense of honor and their love of impossible challenges. As she worked, Tilara couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to either save the Alliance or hasten its doom by introducing an element of chaos that even she couldn't predict. For better or worse, humanity was about to enter galactic affairs, and nothing would ever be the same. The unexpected answer. The response from Earth arrived faster than anyone in the Alliance expected. Barely 6 hours after Tilara's message was transmitted, the ambassador sat in her private chamber, studying the human transmission with a mixture of hope and confusion. She had anticipated days of waiting, followed by diplomatic negotiations. Instead, she received a simple message. "Help is on the way. Coordinates received. Salvage division en route. ETA 48 hours. Salvage division." Admiral Ixel's hologram flickered with interference. The swarm's approach was already disrupting normal communications. "What kind of military unit is that?" Tilara consulted her database. "I don't know. Human military structures are complex and decentralized. This isn't listed among their primary combat fleets." The next 2 days passed in tense anticipation. The Alliance gathered what remained of their forces, hoping to present a coordinated front with whatever help the humans provided. Reports continued to arrive of swarm advances, each one closer than the last. When the human fleet finally arrived, the Alliance Command Center fell silent in collective disbelief. "There must be some mistake," Counselor Rem whispered, his crystalline form clouding with dismay. "These can't be military vessels." The main display showed a collection of ships that defied conventional classification. Leading the fleet was what appeared to be a converted bulk cargo hauler, its massive frame studded with obvious aftermarket modifications. Behind it came a dozen vessels of varying sizes, each one looking more improvised than the last. Mining ships with extra armor bolted to their frames, salvage vessels trailing nets of space debris. what looked like a passenger liner with its luxury viewing windows replaced by weapon ports. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Salvage Division," a voice announced over the command channel. The human's tone was casual, almost cheerful. "Heard you folks had a bug problem." Tilara quickly opened the channel before anyone could take offense at the informal address. "Captain Chen, this is Ambassador Tilara. We were expecting a military response." "Oh, this is military," Chen replied. "Just not the kind you're used to. We're what Earth calls unconventional warfare specialists. Speaking of which, that swarm you mentioned, our sensors are picking up a big cluster of them heading this way. Mind if we set up shop?" Before Tilara could respond, Admiral Ixel cut in. "Captain, the approaching swarm fleet destroyed our 7th Fleet less than 3 days ago. They have over 200 capital ships and countless drone vessels. He paused, searching for a diplomatic term. "Force seems somewhat inadequate." A laugh came over the channel. "Admiral, with all due respect, that's exactly why they sent us. Your fancy military ships didn't work, right? So Earth Command figured it was time for a different approach. Now, about setting up shop. We need to scatter some debris fields. Cut any dead ships floating around." The Alliance commanders exchanged baffled looks. Finally, Tilara responded. "The last battle left significant wreckage in sectors 7 through 12. "Perfect." Chen's enthusiasm was jarring given the situation. "All right, people, let's get to work. Crusher, take your group to Sector 7. Start breaking down those capital ship hulls. Ghost Rider, I want that sensor net up in 15 minutes. Packrat, begin salvage pattern Delta. And yes, you can keep any shinnies you find, as long as they're not vital to the mission." The ramshackle fleet broke formation, each ship moving with surprising precision despite their awkward appearances. Tilara watched in fascination as they began what looked like a standard salvage operation, except they were doing it on the edge of an active combat zone. "Captain," Admiral Ixel tried again. "The swarm will be here in less than 6 hours. This is hardly the time for salvage operations." "On the contrary, Admiral," Chen replied. "This is exactly the time. See, we've read up on your reports. The swarm adapts to whatever you throw at them, right? Learns your patterns, counters your strategies. Well, we're going to give them something new to think about. Something they've never seen before. And that would be Earth's finest tradition, working with whatever's lying around. Trust me, Admiral, the swarm might know how to fight warships, but they've never faced a bunch of salvage rats who've spent their careers turning trash into treasure." As the hours passed, Tilara watched the humans work with increasing interest. Their ships moved through the debris fields with practiced ease, breaking down wreckage into smaller pieces, repositioning chunks of dead vessels, creating what looked like random patterns of space junk. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of other activities, devices being attached to larger pieces of debris, modified mining drones weaving strange patterns between fragments. "They're preparing an ambush," Admiral Ixel realized suddenly. "But using debris instead of ships." Tilara nodded slowly. "They're thinking like scavengers, not soldiers. And if the swarm is used to analyzing military tactics, then they won't be looking for threats in what appears to be random garbage." Chen's voice cut in cheerfully. "Sorry to eavesdrop, but you got it exactly right. Now, about your remaining ships. How do you feel about playing bait?" What followed was the strangest tactical briefing Tilara had ever witnessed. Captain Chen laid out a plan that violated virtually every principle of space combat the Alliance held sacred. It was improvisational, relied heavily on luck, and seemed to treat the laws of physics more as guidelines than rules. "This is madness," Counselor Rem declared after Chen finished. "You want us to deliberately scatter our forces, power down our weapons, and drift like derelicts." "Yep," Chen's hologram grinned, "because that's exactly what the swarm won't expect. They've learned all about how your military thinks and fights. Time to show them how scrappers do it." As the swarm's arrival time approached, Tilara found herself on the bridge of Chen's ship, the Lucky Break, a converted ore hauler that bore little resemblance to its original design. The command center looked more like a recycling facility's control room than a military bridge, with jury-rigged displays and manual controls alongside sophisticated scanning equipment. "I have to ask," Tilara said, watching Chen check a series of non-standard readouts. "Why did Earth send you? Surely they have more conventional forces available." Chen's smile turned thoughtful. "Sometimes the best weapon isn't the biggest or newest. Sometimes it's the one your enemy doesn't know how to categorize. The swarm expects warships and military tactics. We're going to show them something completely different: the art of making do." The first warnings of the swarm's approach began to sound, and Tilara felt her heart race. Everything now depended on whether humanity's weakest fleet could succeed where the Alliance's strongest had failed. Chen's grin widened as she watched the enemy ships appear on her cobbled-together displays. "All right, folks," she broadcast to her fleet, "time to show these bugs why you should never underestimate a good salvage operation. Let's get creative, scrapyard warriors." The swarm emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their biomechanical ships arranging themselves in the elaborate attack patterns that had spelled doom for countless civilizations. Tilara watched from the Lucky Breaks bridge as the massive fleet approached, their organic hulls pulsing with violent purpose. The sight had frozen more experienced military commanders in terror, but Captain Chen merely nodded as if confirming a theory. "Right on schedule," Chen murmured, studying her displays, "and looking just as predictable as we hoped." "Crusher, status on the debris field modifications." "Ready to rock, Cap," came the reply, the voice belonging to a gruff ship commander who'd spent the last 5 hours strategically weakening specific points in the larger wreck pieces. "These bugs won't know what hit them." The swarm's forward elements entered the debris field, their formation shifting to avoid the larger pieces of wreckage. Tilara noticed they weren't bothering to scan the debris thoroughly. Why would they? It was just wreckage from their previous victories. "Now that's interesting," Chen said, pointing to her main screen. "See how they're moving. They've got standard protocols for debris navigation. Probably never had to worry about someone weaponizing garbage before." She keyed her comm. "All ships, execute pattern Junker 1. Let's give them something new to think about." The scattered Alliance ships, playing dead among the debris, began emitting specific electromagnetic frequencies. Frequencies that the humans had discovered could interfere with the swarm's biological components. Not enough to cause damage, but enough to be irritating, like an itch that couldn't be scratched. The effect was subtle but immediate. The swarm ships began to shift, unconsciously moving away from the interference and into channels within the debris field. Channels that the salvage division had carefully prepared. "They're funneling," Admiral Ixel observed from his position on the command deck. "But surely they'll realize." "That's the beauty of hive minds," Chen interrupted. "They're so used to perfect coordination that they don't think to question when their instincts all point the same way." "Packrat, you're up. Show them your collection." The ship designated Packrat, a modified scrap processor, activated dozens of hidden magnetized nets, each one filled with razor-sharp fragments of debris. The nets swung through space like enormous shotgun blasts, their contents accelerated by hastily installed gravitic projectors. The swarm's forward elements, their shields optimized for energy weapons and conventional projectiles, suddenly found themselves being shredded by thousands of pieces of their own victims. "Basic salvage principle," Chen explained as chaos erupted across the battlefield. "Everything's a resource if you use it right. Those fragments, we spent hours cutting them to get the perfect jagged edges. Coast Rider, light 'em up." The converted passenger liner, its hull now bristling with makeshift projectors, activated what looked like a standard sensor array. Instead of scanning, however, it began broadcasting a complex pattern of light and radiation that played havoc with the swarm's biomechanical sensors. Ships that moments ago had been moving with perfect coordination began to twist and turn erratically. Fun fact about biological components, Chen continued, her fingers dancing across her jury-rigged control panel. They're vulnerable to all sorts of things that wouldn't bother standard ships. Crusher, commenced debris field collapse. Pattern Sierra. The carefully weakened larger pieces of wreckage, their structural integrity compromised by hours of precise cutting, began to break apart in calculated ways. Massive chunks of dead ships created chain reactions of collisions, turning the debris field into a blender of deadly shrapnel. The swarm ships, their normal navigation protocols disrupted by Ghost Rider's emissions, found themselves being herded into killing zones. Tilera watched in amazement as the mighty swarm fleet, which had shrugged off the Alliance's most powerful weapons, began to fall into disarray. They're not adapting, she realized. They don't know how to categorize this kind of attack. Exactly. Chen's grin was fierce. They evolved to counter military threats, energy weapons, missile barrages, fighter squadrons. But this, she gestured at the chaos unfolding before them. This is good old-fashioned scrapyard improvisation. No pattern to adapt to, just layers of jury-rigged tricks and salvaged weapons. The swarm's rear elements, recognizing the threat too late, attempted to pull back and regroup. But the humans had prepared for this too. The Lucky Break and several other converted haulers activated their cargo tractor beams, modified far beyond their original specifications, and began manipulating the debris field's outer layer. You see, Chen explained as she coordinated the movement of massive wreck pieces. Standard military doctrine says you need specialized equipment for specialized tasks. But salvage crews, we learned to make do. These tractor beams were meant for moving ore chunks, but with a few modifications. She triggered a sequence, and the debris field's outer ring collapsed inward, trapping a significant portion of the swarm fleet in what had become a giant crushing mechanism. Admiral Ixel, watching from his command station, shook his head in disbelief. This defies all conventional military logic. They're fighting a space battle with mining tools and garbage. Best weapons are the ones the enemy doesn't expect, Chen replied, her attention focused on coordinating her fleet's irregular movements. Swarm's probably trying to analyze this for patterns, but there aren't any. Each ship in my fleet is running custom modifications. No standardization, no uniform tactics. We're not fighting according to any doctrine. We're just solving problems with whatever we've got on hand. The battle continued to evolve in ways that defied traditional combat analysis. The salvage division ships darted through the chaos like practiced scrapyard dancers, using debris for cover, laying improvised traps, and generally making a mockery of the swarm's attempts at tactical adaptation. They're trying to execute a standard containment pattern, Tilera observed, watching the larger swarm ships attempt to reorganize. But they can't establish a proper formation through all this chaos. That's because they're fighting like a military, Chen said, triggering another debris field collapse. We're fighting like scrappers. In the salvage business, you learn fast that plans rarely survive contact with reality. You adapt, you improvise, you use whatever's available. And right now, she gestured at the massive debris field their battle was creating. We've got plenty to work with. As the battle reached its crescendo, Tilera began to understand why Earth had sent this particular fleet. Against an enemy that learned and adapted to patterns, the humans had deployed forces that operated on principle of organized chaos. Each ship was different, each captain had their own style, and their tactics were improvised on the spot using whatever resources were at hand. The swarm, for the first time in recorded history, found itself truly outmatched, not by superior firepower or advanced technology, but by an enemy that turned their own debris into weapons and refused to fight according to any recognizable doctrine. Looks like they're finally figuring out they can't win this one, Chen announced as the remaining swarm ships began a ragged retreat. Crusher, Packrat, let's give them something to remember us by. Execute Operation Scrappy. The final act of the battle would become legendary in Alliance records, a massive chain reaction of debris, magnetics, and improvised explosives that turned the retreat route into a gauntlet of destruction. The swarm ships that finally fled into hyperspace were a fraction of the force that had arrived, and they carried with them a lesson that would reshape galactic warfare. Sometimes, the most dangerous enemy isn't the one with the biggest guns, but the one who can turn your own wreckage against you. The art of improvisation. The aftermath of the battle left the Alliance Council chamber in an uproar. Holograms flickered as representatives argued, their voices mixing in a cascade of disbelief, excitement, and concern. At the center of the storm stood Captain Chen, her salvage crew's battered environment suit standing out starkly against the Council's ceremonial attire. "This cannot be our strategy going forward," Councillor Rem insisted, his crystalline form pulsing with agitation, using salvage ships and debris as weapons. It's undignified." "Dignity doesn't win wars," Admiral Ixel countered, his scales still bearing scorch marks from the recent battle. "For the first time in this conflict, we forced the swarm to retreat. Not just tactical withdrawal, genuine retreat." Tilara studied the battle analysis floating above the council table. The swarm had lost nearly 60% of their attack force, with the remainder fleeing in disarray. More importantly, their legendary ability to adapt had failed them. Every time they'd adjusted to one improvised tactic, the salvage division had switched to something completely different. Chen stepped forward, her boots leaving dusty prints on the immaculate floor. "Here's the thing about the swarm that everyone's missed," she said, pulling up her own data display. A jury-rigged tablet that somehow interfaced perfectly with the Alliance's advanced systems. "They're too perfect." "Explain," First Speaker Naix commanded, her ethereal form drifting closer. "The swarm operates like a perfect military machine," Chen continued. "Every ship in perfect coordination, every response optimized, every adaptation based on clear tactical analysis. But that's their weakness. They can only adapt to things they can analyze, things that follow patterns." She gestured to her own ships, visible through the chamber's transparent walls as they continued to process debris from the battle. "Look at my fleet. Every ship is different. Every captain has their own way of doing things. We don't follow a tactical doctrine. We follow basic principles and improvise from there. How do you adapt to something that never does the same thing twice?" The display shifted, showing recordings from the battle. Alliance observers watched in fascination as human ships used mining lasers to cut apart swarm vessels, converted cargo hooks into harpoons, and turned waste disposal units into makeshift missile launchers. "This is why Earth sent us," Chen explained. "Your military fleets are impressive, but they're predictable. Every ship of the same class has the same capabilities, follows the same protocols. The swarm learns those patterns and counters them. But salvage crews, we spend our careers solving unique problems with whatever tools we have available." Admiral Ixel nodded slowly. "And since every solution is improvised based on available resources, there's no pattern to learn," Chen finished. "Every engagement is different because we're literally making it up as we go along, using whatever we can find or build on the spot." Tilara watched the Council's reactions with interest. The Alliance had always prided itself on technological advancement and military precision. The idea of adopting such an unconventional approach clearly made many uncomfortable, but the results were undeniable. "The swarm will return," First Speaker Naix said quietly, "and they will be stronger." "Good," Chen replied with a grin. "More stuff for us to work with." "See, that's another thing they don't understand. Every ship they lose becomes raw material for our next improvisation. They're literally giving us more weapons to use against them." The discussion was interrupted by urgent signals from the outer defense networks. Tilara's heart sank as she read the data. "Multiple swarm fleets converging on our position, at least 3 times the size of the force we just defeated." But instead of showing concern, Chen's grin widened. "Perfect timing. We just finished our new modifications. She pulled up schematics that made several council members recoil in horror. You know those biological components the swarm uses. Turns out they react really interestingly to certain frequencies. We've spent the last few hours turning your old communication arrays into what we're calling sonic disruptors. Those arrays were priceless artifacts of our telecommunications history. Counselor Rem protested. And now they're weapons that might save your civilization. Chen countered. This is what humans do. We adapt, we repurpose, we turn what's available into what's needed. Your museums are full of perfectly preserved technology that could be modified into exactly what we need right now. The council chamber erupted in fresh arguments, but T-Lura noticed something interesting. The military representatives, led by Admiral Ixel, were already pulling up inventories of obsolete equipment and theoretical modifications. The Admiral's eyes gleamed as Chen explained how centuries-old mining equipment could be combined with modern power sources to create devastating short-range weapons. The swarm thinks they understand warfare, Chen said as she approved various improvised weapon designs. They've learned every proper military doctrine in the galaxy, but they've never faced a species that treats combat like a recycling challenge. Every piece of debris is a potential weapon, every broken ship a source of parts, every obsolete system a chance to try something new. As the massive swarm fleet approached, T-Lura watched the salvage division transform the sector into what Chen called a scrapper's paradise. Ancient satellites were converted into automated repair drones. Decommissioned cargo vessels became mobile bomb platforms. Even space stations scheduled for demolition found new life as improvised fortress positions. This isn't just about winning battles, T-Lura realized, watching Chen coordinate the organized chaos of preparation. You're teaching us a new way of thinking. Chen nodded, her hands busy rewiring what had once been a luxury yacht's entertainment system into a tactical command center. Humans learned long ago that survival isn't about having the best equipment. It's about making the best use of whatever you've got. The Alliance has spent centuries advancing technology in a straight line. We're showing you how to think sideways. As the first wave of swarm ships appeared on long-range sensors, T-Lura noticed something had changed in the Alliance personnel working alongside the humans. Gone was the rigid adherence to protocol, replaced by an eager willingness to experiment. Officers who had once demanded proper military solutions now traded improvisation ideas with salvage crews. The art of improvisation, it seemed, was proving to be humanity's most valuable contribution to galactic warfare. Not because it was the most powerful or advanced approach, but because it was the one thing the swarm could never fully adapt to. Controlled chaos guided by creative necessity. Victory from the scrap heap. The swarm arrived with overwhelming force, their biological ships darkening the stars with their numbers. But this time, they found something very different waiting for them. The neat, orderly defense they expected had been replaced by what appeared to be a massive junkyard in space. The sector was barely recognizable. Centuries of Alliance technological achievement had been transformed into what Chen proudly called the galaxy's biggest spare parts bin. "They're scanning us," reported Crusher from his modified mining vessel. "Betting those biological processors are having fits trying to categorize all this." "Let them scan," Chen replied from the Lucky Break's newly redesigned bridge. The command center now resembled a creative chaos of salvage displays, jury-rigged controls, and improvised tactical systems. Everything they're seeing is technically garbage. It's what they don't see that matters. T-Lura watched as the swarm fleet began their approach, their formation perfect as always. But she noticed something different in their movement, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. "They're being cautious," she observed. "The last battle taught them to fear human unpredictability." "Fear's not quite right," Chen corrected, her fingers dancing across a control panel built from 3 different species technology. "They're trying to be methodical, analyze everything before committing. Problem is, that's exactly what we wanted them to do. Ghost Rider, you're up. Show them your new trick." The converted passenger liner, now bristling with a bizarre array of modified communication equipment, began broadcasting on multiple frequencies simultaneously. The signal appeared random, but T-Lara recognized components of old Alliance entertainment broadcasts, human music, and what seemed to be cooking show instructions, all merged into a cacophony that made her translator glitch. The effect on the swarm was immediate and spectacular. Their biological components, trying to process the overwhelming stream of conflicting information, began to struggle. Ships started moving out of formation, their perfect coordination disrupted by confusion. Fun thing about biological processors, Chen explained, grinning as she watched the chaos unfold. They try to find meaning in everything. Feed them enough random but seemingly meaningful data, and they get stuck in analysis loops. Crusher, time to wake up our sleeping beauties. What the swarm had dismissed as random debris suddenly came to life. Hundreds of dormant drone ships, cobbled together from salvaged parts and controlled by ancient gaming computers, activated simultaneously. Each one was different, each moving according to its own bizarre logic, creating patterns that defied military analysis. See, we figured something out about the swarm's adaptation process, Chen continued, coordinating the assault. They learn by identifying patterns and developing counters. But how do you counter something that follows no pattern? Every drone out there is running on different hardware, different software, some of it centuries old. Their responses aren't just unpredictable. They're practically random. The swarm's front line began to break apart as they tried to engage threats that refused to behave according to any recognizable combat doctrine. Salvaged mining lasers cut through their hulls, while repurposed garbage disposals launched clouds of molecularly sharpened debris. Cargo tractors grabbed smaller ships and flung them into their companions. Now for the real surprise, Chen announced. Packrat, initiate Operation Feedback Loop. The modified scrap processor activated its newest weapon, a massive array of sensors and transmitters built from countless salvaged communication devices. But instead of broadcasting noise, it began reflecting the swarm's own neural signals back at them, slightly modified by human communication protocols. The effect was devastating. The swarm's hive mind, suddenly bombarded with versions of its own commands filtered through human communication patterns, began to experience what Chen called a biological blue screen of death. Ships started responding to phantom commands, their coordinated actions dissolving into confusion. That's the thing about perfect systems, Chen explained to the amazed Alliance observers. They're really vulnerable to imperfect input. Throw enough chaos into the mix, and even the most sophisticated biological computer starts making mistakes. Admiral, your forces are up. The Alliance fleet, now modified according to human principles of creative improvisation, struck from multiple directions. Their weapons had been altered, their tactics abandoned in favor of controlled chaos. Each ship captain had been encouraged to solve problems their own way, leading to a battle strategy that was impossible to predict or counter. T-Lara watched in awe as the mighty swarm fleet, terror of the galaxy, began to crumble before an attack that defied conventional military logic. They can't adapt, she realized. Every time they develop a counter to one approach, they face 10 different ones. Exactly. Chen's voice was triumphant. They're fighting the last battle, trying to adapt to what worked before. But we're not doing anything the same way twice. Every ship, every captain is improvising based on what's available right now. There's no pattern to learn, no strategy to counter. The battle reached its climax as Chen unveiled her final surprise. The debris field itself, seeded with thousands of tiny transmitters salvaged from ancient communication satellites, began broadcasting a signal that mimicked the swarm's own neural network. The entire battlefield became one massive disruption zone, turning the swarm's greatest strength, their perfect coordination, into a devastating weakness. Sometimes, Chen said as she watched the mighty swarm fleet tear itself apart in confusion, the best way to beat a perfect enemy is to be perfectly imperfect. The victory was total. The swarm, unable to cope with an enemy that refused to fight according to any recognizable pattern, retreated in disarray. More importantly, they had learned a lesson that would change the face of galactic warfare forever. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one with the most advanced technology, but the one who can turn anything into a weapon. In the aftermath, as Alliance worlds celebrated their salvation, Tilera found Chen in what had once been a pristine military museum. The human captain was cheerfully explaining to horrified curators how their precious artifacts could be modified into devastatingly effective weapons. "Your people will never look at warfare the same way again," Tilera observed. Chen nodded, holding up what appeared to be an ancient agricultural drone. "That's the real victory here. We didn't just beat the swarm. We showed the galaxy a new way of thinking. Everything is a resource. Every piece of technology, no matter how old or obsolete, has potential. Victory doesn't always go to the strongest or most advanced. Sometimes it goes to the ones who are best at working with what they've got." As Tilera watched the Alliance begin its transformation, integrating human principles of adaptive improvisation into their rigid military doctrine, she realized that the galaxy had changed forever. The swarm had taught them to fear perfect coordination and overwhelming force. Humanity had taught them something far more valuable: the art of creative chaos, the power of improvisation, and the simple truth that even the weakest fleet could triumph if it refused to fight according to anyone's rules but its own. The era of perfect warfare was over. The age of creative improvisation had begun.